Next up, we have Special Teams Coordinator and Defensive Assistant Coach, Pat Kirkland. Questions for Pat, Greg?
So, Pat, just the returning, is it odd, surreal? How quickly have you gone, oh, okay, I'm back where I was? How's it working?
A little bit of everything. You know, the one thing I realized the other day is, you know, really since 2000, West Virginia's been home for me. You know, with the exception of 3 years being down in Alabama. You know, I've been here. This is my second time. Been at Glenville State and obviously at University of Charleston. So it's a blessing. It's a responsibility, a privilege, all the above. Exciting. You know, got a lot of work to do, but it's been great to be back thus far.
Are you different as a coach? You know, even since you left UC, what would you learn at Jack State?
I'd like to think so. You know, the one goal is that from a coaching standpoint is not just recruiting and NCAA rules, which is the big topic now, forever changing, but strategy and scheme, recruiting-wise. You know, you've got to work to get better and go out there and learn. So, you know, I'd like to think I've gotten better. Part of that is just having new staff members that you're surrounded by. I've learned a great deal from Coach Rich Rodriguez, you know, the first time when I was here back in 2006 and 2007 and, you know, being with him for 3 seasons at Jacksonville State, it's phenomenal. And, you know, he encouraged you, you know, not just professional development, but just to go out there and learn and be innovative and different, which is okay.
So Coach talked about how he really doesn't have a gauge on returners yet and things like that. Based on being in the spring, what are you doing in that aspect? What are you kind of working on? What are you trying to figure out? If he doesn't really have an idea and he just kind of joke that they're just catching the football but not able to say anything else on it right now, what are you doing in terms of your workload to try to figure out who maybe returners could be?
Yeah, big part of it is, I mean, you've got a balanced scheme and evaluation. And I think schematically, you know, when the special teams, we're I don't want to say we're keeping it simple, but we're getting better at the technique stuff. A big part of my responsibility, you know, this spring and really since, you know, got here in January, is just evaluating the personnel that we have. And that's just not kickers and returners and, you know, guys that can snap and hold, but, you know, guys that can get down there and cover kicks and block and have a mentality and the accountability that you need in the kicking game. You know, because it is, you know, we're anywhere between 18 to 20% of the snaps in a game are related to the kicking game. So we've got to make sure we've got personnel that not just fit our scheme, but also the mentality and the accountability that we need to have in that kicking game.
How much has your head coaching experience helped you now? And this is like just running that program, and now how does that help you, you know, move into this spot?
Yeah, I think I grew up a lot as a head coach. You know, with 10 seasons, I was different, you know, towards the back end of it. I think initially I was a little more of a micromanager and wanted to which is okay, you know, but then I really was around some coaches that had been with me for a while and started to delegate a little bit more and give them more responsibility. I think it's helped me now with just being able to juggle, you know, when you're a special teams coordinator, you've got, you know, not just one unit, you've got, you know, really 6 responsibilities, different units that you have, which means 6 different personnel groupings. And, you know, one thing I've always been really impressed with Coach Rod is he surrounds himself with really good people first that are accountable and have great initiative. And so we've got some guys that have really, you know, just started and moved forward quickly with the evaluation and just the coaching process.
You look at the players that you are trying to identify for some special team spots. Obviously, you got different ones. You've got protectors. You've got guys getting downfield covering. Physical attributes any different from things that they might show in, you know, regular reps, offense, defense reps? What are you looking for?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely a mentality. You know, it's funny you say that. You know, it's back when I was in Alabama at Jacksonville State. You know, we're speaking down at this third down clinic just about. Everybody said, hey, you want the best athletes out there, the fastest guys on defense on third down. And, you know, really you want the guys that are accountable, that can make adjustments, you know, that aren't going to have mental busts. That carries over, that philosophy really into the special teams and the kicking game. It's such a big play, you know, and I think we're going to be aggressive with our philosophy in the kicking game, but you need guys that you can trust to go out there and execute at a high level. Not just can run down there and make plays, but also have the ability to make adjustments and that you can count on. We're not always going to have the perfect call. Sometimes they've got to make you right, and that plays a big role in it as well.
There's some guys that might not be the fastest guy or the whatever, but avoiding blockers, just have a sense of where they are on the field, that stand out, that earn spots on those teams?
Absolutely. There's a lot of snaps in a game, and it's a long season. It used to be years ago you played 10 games and maybe another one, and now it's a long season. You got to prepare for that. We want to play a lot of bodies. And a big role of that is putting guys, on the teams, special teams that can play a lot of snaps, and that does play a role in the evaluation of which guys are going to be on those units, what they're doing on offense and defense.
You hear philosophies of special teams like Beamer ball.
Sure.
I think at Kansas State. Some people view it as a way to get an advantage. Other people maybe view it as a way, don't kill yourself. Where does that fall? Where does that philosophy fall with you?
I think, we're definitely not just, check a box and get through it. We want to be aggressive, opportunistic, and the neat ideal about special teams is, one, you've got to execute at a high level because they'll get you beat real fast. But you also have the ability to take advantage. And, each week, probably one of the biggest things that we have to do is just self-scout. What did we do the last 2 weeks that they're seeing on film? What can we do better, and how can we change it up without changing the philosophy and the scheme as a whole? But I think you're going to see a special teams units that are aggressive, play with a sense of urgency. I'm hoping that we got some guys that, really get out there. When your number's called, you got to make a play. I tell our snappers all the time, unfortunately, no one's going to know your name until you have a bad one. I think we've got some good guys in the room, but we've got to continue to get better.
What about the phrase hidden yardage? What does that mean to you? Is that some people, really look into that? Other people, where does that fall with you?
Well, a big part of our philosophy is field position. Okay. I mean, it's got to be. Sometimes I'll even tell the returners on punt, a fair catch sometimes is as good as a return. If that ball hits the ground and rolls for an additional 17 yards, that's on us. So having a guy that is back there that's fearless, but also that you trust to make a play. And that it always has been, always will be. Special teams, a big part of that is winning the field position battle.
Was it tough for you to leave Charleston? You guys were successful. You were a head coach. What went into that decision to step away?
Yeah, I was blessed to be the head coach at the University of Charleston. I learned a lot. I hope I grew as a coach, and I felt like I left the program in a better place than when I got there. And nothing to say about what they did in the past, but we worked really hard. And we had a really good staff and group of coaches and some tremendous players, and heck, some guys that are still playing, in the NFL now. And but I think an opportunity that I saw the transfer portal coming. I always was excited about Coach Rod getting another opportunity, and I knew that that's a staff I wanted to be a part of. It was exciting. The first time I was with him, I learned a great deal, and I'm still learning. I'm in a position where, I want to continue to develop and move forward with my career and, future endeavors. And this, for me, was a home run for me, absolutely.
The first time you were here, you were a GA with one of 2 or 3 others, maybe.
Oh yeah, staff's changed a little bit since then.
Yeah, and that's where my question was going. Now you've got other people. More work can be farmed out, distributed. Has that been part of what you've been getting used to here in these first few weeks?
Yeah, the first time I was here, I started as a GA, then kind of had some different roles when some coaches left temporarily, coached offense for a little bit in a bowl game, coached some back end a little bit. Then I became the director of recruiting, and I think one time I was high school relations, and probably all those things prepared me to be a head coach, that's for sure. Now I think we're just surrounded by the staff that's a little bit bigger, and not a little bit, it's a lot bigger. But I think, it's exciting because, handling the special teams, I get to deal with every position, with the exception of, maybe a couple of big kids and the quarterbacks that aren't involved. I'm dealing with everybody and get a chance to evaluate and recruit for all positions. So to me, this is a great opportunity.
Hey, Pat, what do you mean by I saw the transfer portal coming? That sounds ominous.
What's that?
What did you mean by I saw the transfer portal coming?
Oh, not a solid, just that it's coming.
Yeah, but that sounds like you probably understandably concerned about the effect that might have had, but that was,
Oh, when I was at Charleston,
Yeah,
you mean? Yeah. I thought we had some really good players at Charleston. When the portal opened up, I knew every year we were going to replace the roster at that level. Whether it was an FCS team or an FBS school coming to take some of our better players, it was, I didn't think that was avoidable, and I felt it'd be tough each year to have to replace a whole roster. And was it the role, the main reason I left? No, but it did play a role with that.
Has it made you more resourceful? Has it made you a better coach?
Absolutely. Yep.
In what ways?
I think one, just from the recruiting piece, that you got to be dynamic and you've got to educate these guys on what the school has to offer and what you can. How are they going to be more marketable in your program? What can you do for them? Which is a big piece of it now. The nice thing about West Virginia is, I've always said this: if academics is important to you and you want to have an opportunity to compete for championships in a tremendous environment, to me, this is a home run. And that's why it's exciting to be back. And I thought this was an attractive place, obviously, for potential student athletes to be at. And we've got the track record, and we've got the guys that have gone on to create value for themselves and pursue NFL careers, and that's what players want to hear now.
One other quick about the evaluation part of it. Obviously, you're evaluating to establish your roster.
Sure.
Okay. And then you're evaluating who can do what. Do the schemes kind of in flux until you can figure out, okay, who do we got, what can they do, and then go from there? Is that how it works?
Yeah, I think that's a philosophy of coaching. Some guys are, hey, this is my scheme, and I'm going to recruit to that scheme. But at the same time, our number one goal is not to lead, the Big 12 in return yards or number of kicks, blocks. We want to lead the Big 12 in wins, at the end of the day. So whatever we've got to do to put our players in the best position to be successful in the kicking game is what we're going to do. So I guess to summarize that answer, yeah, our scheme's going to reflect the guys that we've got in those rooms.
We're going to speak to Rodney here soon. What do you think of him as a player or receiver here the last couple of years? But there was a thought of him becoming the returner this season with the old staff. I know Rod hasn't figured any of that out yet.
Sure.
But what do you think of him, his ability to maybe be a returner? He's obviously a full-on athlete from what he did in high
Yeah,
school.
I mean, he's got the potential to be a tremendous returner. He's got great ball skills. He's dynamic. But, we're evaluating. I think we've got, anywhere from 5 to 7 guys that we're looking at to play that role. And, obviously, ultimately, Coach Rod will make that decision, but we're far from having to make that decision right now.
Do you ever have any hesitation on having somebody be your main returner if they're going to be really relied upon with the offensive side of the ball? Would you rather be somebody that's more their specialty and they're trying to find a niche there, or a top player on offense also doing it?
No. I remember this was years ago. Noel Devine was playing, and he was a pretty successful tailback, and we had him back there at kickoff return. And I was speaking down, I think it was the Charleston fan club, and a couple guys said, doesn't it make you nervous to have your starting tailback back there returning kicks? I said, it does, but it also makes the opponent nervous. So in my mind, if we've got the blessing from the head coach to put the best person back there, that's who we want.
you got a defensive background as a player and a coach. I'm sure as head coach you did some special teams, right? But pretty
Yeah.
spread out. But like to become
Yep.
a coordinator at Jacksonville State on special teams, I'm not sure how new or different it was, but different challenge for you, different.
Yeah. The biggest challenge about being a coordinator in special teams is that each week you're playing a new opponent. And, offensively and defensively, you're getting ready for one unit. And, so there's usually a lot of carryover with those two different sides of the balls. In the kicking game, there's a lot of diversity that you see. So there's a lot of planning. So you try to keep, your core philosophy and scheme the same, but also each week be diverse enough that you're not predictable, but also have enough in that, that you can throw a couple wrinkles in there and be aggressive with those units.
You have a Phil Brady fake punt?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I think you got a plan for everything, and we still talk about that play. It was a tremendous, here's the biggest thing about things in the kicking game. A big part of my role is that during the week, when the opportunity on Saturday or Thursday night or whenever you're playing presents itself, My job is during the week to give the head coach enough confidence in the way we execute to call it on game day. And that's a big part of what we do planning ahead, is making sure that, you know, we want to be aggressive, but I don't want to roll the dice and just, you know, keep my fingers crossed. We're going to do things that we know we can execute and at a high level.
Pat, are you going to recruit specialists, or do you recruit other positions as well? And what areas are you targeting?
We got a little bit of both. We do some area recruiting, and we'll also do some position-specific stuff. So, you know, right now we've had some, you know, a couple staff changes. So everybody's going to go where they know and they're familiar with. I've been blessed to be up this way in this region for a while, but we're also doing a lot of position recruiting.
Okay, thank you very much, Coach.
Thank you, guys. I appreciate it.